I don't normally read the warning, but as this video's character is very popular, there will be spoilers ahead for the entirety of Haikyuu. This video presumes you have read the manga of Haikyuu. Humor me for a moment, would you? If someone were to observe you purely from what they could see with their eyes, to judge a book by its cover, so to speak, how do you think they might describe you? Perhaps physical aspects would be described. Aspects like height, eye color, or hair color. Of course there are more, but I generally imagine it would be limited to what could only be seen with our eyes. A more astute observer might make remarks about your body language or stance. Now, for the follow-up question. What would they have missed about you? What would I miss about you if I simply judged a book by its cover? And to expand on that a little further, could you tell me how the story of that book would end based on the title or cover? Could you tell me the outcome based on the title alone? My goal in this series of video essays has been to speak on several characters in Haikyuu and how they showcase the idea of talent in all forms. As one of the 3 pieces of media that changed the trajectory of my life and inspired me to be better, as well as my favorite anime, Haikyuu will always hold a special place in my heart as a masterclass series, particularly in its extremely relatable characters, who subsequently continue to develop, embody, and shape the themes of the series. So, that being said, we're in part 5 of this series now, and I'd like to begin with a little something outside of the source material. There's an interview with Furudate and his 3 editors in the Haikyuu guidebook, to which I still think about often, ever since I read the translated interview so long ago, and one which I mentioned in part 1 of this series. While I'll elaborate a bit more about their discussion later, I think it is quite pertinent to mention now, as it frames much of what is to come. I remember you said, the thing that stuck with me was when you were talking about Oikawa. You said, when you start something, there are a lot of manga where it's written like whether or not having a talent is the key. But it's totally different, isn't it? It's by doing something and giving it your all that at the end you can say whether or not you had that talent. That's why talent isn't something so easy that you can just casually say whether or not you have had it from the beginning. When I heard that, I thought, this author is amazing. And again, in another editor interview, in responding to the cultivation of talent and what the right way to go about creating manga was. In that sense, I really loved the author Haruichi Furudate sensei. Not because I was in charge of him, but because I really respect him as a person. After having made a success out of Haikyuu, he once said to me, I don't know whether I have talent, so I draw and find out. According to him, talent is often regarded as being a key to success, but it's not. It does not exist as something so kind, like an entrance or a doorway. It's only at the very last moment, when you've exhausted all of your efforts and have fallen over, that God comes down and says, I shall tell you whether or not you have talent, as a reward. Furudate sensei went on to say to me that you don't know if you've got the talent until the end, so you feel insecure about it and work to ascertain whether or not you do. You can do your job, believing you have the talent, but it isn't until you've quit that you know for sure whether you had it. So I'm trying to continue pushing myself every day without overdoing it. While this idea is quite prevalent throughout Haikyuu's cast, I believe there is one character whom Furudate wrote to champion this idea. I don't know if I have talent, so I work to find out if I do. And, as it so happens, that very same spirit is echoed in one of the greatest athletes of all time. Thomas Edward Patrick Brady Jr., also known as Tom Brady, played in the National Football League for 23 years, standing at the top of the hill and winning the Super Bowl a ludicrous 7 times, and appearing in another 3, which comes out to his team being number 1 30% of the time during his playing career. In addition to throwing the most touchdowns and securing the most victories out of any of his contemporaries. The list of transcendent athletes that have stood at the peak once is already small enough, much less 2, or 3, or 4 times. But 7 times? With an overview of his whole professional career, One might think that he was always highly heralded, that he was a prodigy from an early age, singled out and delivering much like other athletes detailed in this series, like LeBron James or Andrew Luck. Having had a rather okay collegiate career in which he was switched around with his backup, he was quite unimpressive at the NFL Combine, particularly in the physical realm. His physical testing was rather poor, and his draft report mentioned he was skinny and narrow, looking a little frail and lacking great physical stature and strength, lacking mobility and ability to avoid the rush, lacking a really strong arm, and finally, as a player who would get exposed if he had to improvise. The summary states plainly that Brady is not what you're looking for in terms of physical stature, strength, arm strength, and mobility. Does that sound like the sort of athlete you would be looking for, particularly at the quarterback position? One in which mobility is a premium and arm strength is considered important? Sure, evaluators listed off a few positives. He was tall, smart, accurate, had the intangibles, was a leader and knew himself and his abilities. But those sorts of compliments can be written about all sorts of quarterbacks, and has been written about many quarterbacks who have never come anywhere close to achieving anything remotely similar to the career of Tom Brady. Brady would be selected at pick number 199 in the 2000 NFL Draft. 198 players selected before him, with 6 quarterbacks being selected ahead of him. No other players from that draft class lasted as long as he did, as he retired in 2023 at the age of 45. When he first got his opportunity with an injury to the quarterback ahead of him, he took it and never looked back. I am not a fan of Tom Brady. In fact, he played for one of the teams that often battled against the Denver Broncos, as a matchup between the Broncos and Patriots in the 2010s was often heralded as a marquee matchup. And even as I am a huge fan of Peyton Manning and acknowledge that while he was a worthy rival to Brady, there is no debate. Tom Brady is the greatest quarterback of all time. His final championship at the age of 43 cemented that opinion for myself, and many others who watch American football, I wager. So what was it that made him so unbelievably good, rising from an overlooked 6th round draft pick to become one of the most prolific athletes of all time? We've been talking about the idea of talent throughout this series, and since part 1, I've been working off of a particular formula. It's prudent to remind ourselves here of what that is. Physical traits added to intangibles and luck determines the ceiling of one's talent. Some people may start a little further ahead and have a higher floor due to natural aptitude. Recall from part 2 the brief discussion on intangibles. They refer to the untouchable, or something that is not of a physical nature. As said by a 2008 ESPN article, intangibles are the attributes one possesses or the behavior he exhibits that require absolutely no physical talent, but are crucial to success. I would refer to intangibles as the it factor that makes someone built differently. Of course, intangibles cover a variety of things such as technique, hand-eye coordination, work ethic, intuition, communication, and drive, to name a few.
When a coach or a scout tells you that this guy has the intangibles, or we're looking for the intangibles, that's a euphemism for saying we have no clue what we're looking for, we just know it when we see it.
I have been scouring the internet for opinions on what made him so good, as NFL brain trusts have tried and failed to draft the next Tom Brady for the past 20 years or so. Some say it was because he could process the field extremely well. But there have been hundreds of others considered to be excellent processors, and none have reached his heights. Some say it was because of his mental toughness and poise. But there have been hundreds of others with similarly iron wills, and none have reached his heights. Some say it was because of his well-maintained physical abilities and underrated arm. But there have been hundreds of others with rocket arms and superior athleticism that came and went. Some might say he got lucky, that he got drafted to the right place in the right situation. But many others have gone to situations deemed perfect, and failed to live up to expectations. I've seen him described as boring, even more curiously, heroically boring. lacking the crazy highlights that some of his more physically gifted contemporaries would produce, and yet, producing undeniable results year in and year out. A particular example that most fans know is the 25-point comeback against the Atlanta Falcons in the 2017 Super Bowl. But I challenge those fans to give me one specific Brady-centric highlight from that game. What goes largely glossed over is how heroically boring Brady was. Quarterbacks, to some degree, are like setters. They are the player that touches the ball the most and will set the offensive tempo. If he played erratically from that point on, without confidence, there is no chance that they win that game. Granted, credit is also due to the other 10 players on the field who aided him and played huge roles in their comeback as well. And quite a bit of credit should be given to the many, many teammates who played alongside him across his career. Oh, and his many coaches as well. I can't personally remember any incredible highlights from him in that 2017 Super Bowl, but just good, consistent, solid positives after a disastrous first half. And that consistency in play and temperament led his team back, with a bit of luck as well, leading to his 5th championship. I don't think it's accurate to say Brady was unathletic. No athlete is compared to the average human, though he certainly wasn't an athletic freak compared to many of his contemporaries. And luck almost certainly played a factor, having been drafted by a team that saw the potential in him and allowed him to nourish it when other teams wouldn't have. But it's the intangibles, the elements unseen, combined with the visible elements of talent he did have in the formula, that made Tom Brady the greatest quarterback of all time. Created by Furudate and his editor to make the series more popular by introducing a hot guy to Haikyuu, Oikawa has risen far above that status as, yes, a hot guy in Haikyuu, one of the series' most popular characters as he served as the first primary antagonist for Karasuno, Kageyama, and Hinata for about 150 chapters. In many character analysis videos, I've mentioned that the names and kanji of Haikyuu's cast of well-written characters were intentionally chosen by Furudate, and Oikawa's name is no different. His first name, Tōru, means to go through, while his last name, Oikawa, roughly translates to reaching the river. Quite appropriate for Oikawa, as one who Karasuno has to go through to get to Nationals, and as a player who always reached the river, but could never cross over to get to Nationals. I suspect some of the general statements in Brady's scouting report could be applied to Oikawa. Tall, generally plays within himself, produces in big spots in big games, smart and alert. But notice that none of those descriptors are exactly exciting. To put it simply, he is not identified as a prodigy, even by his own coach. He is an efficient player and a skilled player, but not a genius like the massive talent that is his Kohai. Were I to continue creating a scouting report on Oikawa, it is observable that he doesn't really make mistakes. One might even call him heroically boring. I watched through all of Season 1 and Season 2 for Oikawa, and didn't see any moments where he makes any setter errors, and nor do those successful sets receive any fanfare. He is observant, identifying and making adjustments when necessary in both of his matchups with Karasuno. And while his serves are in the upper echelon, Nationals proves that there are servers who are on par with him. When he does make a mistake, he has the mental fortitude to move on to the next play as a steadying force, as someone who can draw the absolute best out of his teammates. His intangibles of leadership and ability to complement any player is much like Brady, who often made the offense look far more than the sum of its parts, often throwing to castoffs and jags from other teams. And when he did have superstars, he was unbelievably productive. Oikawa does much of the same, able to integrate the mercurial Kiyotani into being a crucial offensive piece during their rematch with Karasuno, and elevating the play of Aoba Josai as a perennial powerhouse team in the prefecture, despite none of his teammates receiving much fanfare outside of their games with Karasuno. However, all of this seems to pale in comparison to the genius and overwhelming talent of his two rivals, each demonstrating incredible natural ability and feel for the game of volleyball. So much so, that he feels he can only fight against the tide for so long, that eventually, he too will be swept up in it. This seems to hold true in Season 1, as he acknowledges that someday, Kageyama might defeat him. But that day is not today, when he makes the correct prediction for the game-winning block. There does not seem to be joy in his victory, only relief at having stemmed the tide. Eventually, the tide proves to be too much as Seijo falls at the hands of Kurasuno during Season 2, extinguishing Oikawa's last chance to fight on the national stage. Despite all of the work he has put in and the accomplishments achieved, his high school career is over. It seemingly should be a crushing end, a confirmation of what he has known from the very beginning. And yet, he stands tall, battered, but more than willing to continue his journey, wherever that may lead. I used to think about what exactly Oikawa's little monologue meant, but in retrospect, it seems to plant seeds of Furudate's real thoughts on talent, specifically this part. In regards to physique, I can't say much, but if you yourself think that you don't have talent, then you'll probably never have it. One of the oldest adages of fiction, that being hard work versus talent, that they are destined to be on opposite ends of the spectrum. But in my opinion, and from what I can tell Furudate would agree, more often than not, they are inextricably linked. Earlier in this video, I spoke of 2 interviews, each with sections on the idea of talent and how Furudate seems to view talent, each with one highlighted main point. From the first interview, talent is no key to success. It is not something kind, where we might be able to immediately tell whether or not we have it. And from the second, talent can only be determined at the very end. It's only at the very last moment when you've exhausted all of your efforts and have fallen over that God comes down and says, "I shall tell you whether or not you have talent," as a reward. These 2 points are further expounded upon during the Nationals arc, between Kita's speech on geniuses, talent, and hard work, and the perspective of the original Little Giant. I don't think Furudate is claiming that all people are created equal from the perspective of talent. Far from it. We can see that for ourselves in the series, with some having natural abilities that cannot be taught, whether on a mental or physical level, which is something Oikawa also acknowledges. But what Furudate is claiming about talent, and is quite beautifully shown throughout numerous characters like Hoshiumi in the previous part, and particularly Oikawa, is this. The world is utterly unfair, but at the same time, it's ruthlessly fair. Though that remark occurs much later, it is still very much applicable here to Oikawa, having mused upon the words of the coach who helped reframe his views on talent prior to the final point of his high school career. He seems to come to understand those words. That yes, people are born different, some with greater natural gifts than others, but that talent must be acknowledged and worked on to be built up to its maximum potential. And who's to say that his maximum potential has already been reached? The easier way out would be to simply say, "I'm not a genius. I don't have talent, so I'll never reach their heights." The world is quite unfair in those regards. Physical traits, innate ability, luck. But through practice, grit, and unbelievable determination on the traits you can control, that is how you improve and get better. That is how the world is ruthlessly fair. Of course, as if to immediately challenge him, he is confronted after the match by none other than his nemesis, who bluntly warns Oikawa that his methods were wrong. And for what? For his worthless pride? That there was a place for him to fulfill his potential at Shiratorizawa, the place he should have chosen all along. One would think that losing to your genius rival and never overcoming your nemesis would be enough to cause doubt. But no, Oikawa seems more resolute than ever. That he never thought he made the wrong decision, that his volleyball career is going to continue, and that his pride, yes, while being worthless, is something that Ushijima should never forget. A line that has proven to be one of Oikawa's most defining, for it is that pride that takes him across the globe and defines his path. And so he walks off, the final game of his high school career over, and the future upon him. All of that, trying to figure out that big question that Furudate has posed. Does he have talent for the sport of volleyball? Or not? Oikawa appears briefly during the Nationals arc, all appearing in the midst of a run. One of my favorite parts is how he is included as one of the many who have suffered a setback today, but seek to be better tomorrow, and the day after that, having reaped the valuable wealth of experience and the memories it can bring. When the Haikyuu time skip was revealed, there were all sorts of theories flying around as to the fates of many of the series' beloved characters, Oikawa being one of them. In hindsight, a flashback in the middle of Season 2 actually revealed exactly what was in store for him, with Kunimi remarking that Oikawa is exactly the kind of guy to do something crazy like that. That, meaning going overseas and becoming a professional, and what's more, coincidentally meeting up in Brazil with the ray of sunshine himself, Hinata, much to the chagrins of their rivals. The combination of the two of them is a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one, with considerable new insights into both characters and some hijinks between them. Readers generally seem to agree that Oikawa was one of the likeliest to go pro, and were proven correct, but not quite in the manner they expected. The time the two of them spent together is quite concise, from the very end of chapter 371 to the middle of 374, but yet is excellent in so many ways, from giving us an unlikely pairing to detailing more of Oikawa's motivations, watching them play volleyball together, the elevating of each other's skills, and for thematic reasons. Who can forget Oikawa consciously deciding to stop calling Hinata by his nickname, instead calling him Shoyo, signaling that he sees him as an equal. What better way for Hinata to lift his spirits, to connect and get back on his feet, than to play with the setter whose ability to connect with anyone in volleyball is second to none? Hinata puts it best after hitting a perfect set from Oikawa, who has had his own troubles battling the adjustment to beach volleyball. He thought through to what comes next at every step. No matter where in the world he is, no matter how many people are on his team, he doesn't change. It's fitting that Oikawa would become a supercharged version of his mentor, Jose Blanco. Jose Blanco, when observed by young Oikawa, was already on the tail end of his career, and not a particularly standout individual. While others were paying attention to the young super ace that seemed to regain his form, Oikawa was far more interested in the real star. The one who quietly got that ace back on track and walked off the court without any fanfare. And so he followed his mentor to Argentina, where he plays. Oikawa still remains himself at their departure, with a declaration that he's going to beat everyone. And that's proven true, as in the final chapter, chapter 402, he is the final boss for not only Kageyama and Ushijima, but for all of Japan, playing as the setter for the Argentinian national team in the Olympics for their extravagant family quarrel, much to the acknowledgement of his rival, his nemesis, and his best friend, all of whom recall his final statements to them. Like Tom Brady, who was quite anonymous at the time of his drafting, Oikawa is noted by the commentator to have been a virtual unknown as a player during his high school years in Japan, having never gotten to nationals. But here he stands now, in front of the whole world, challenging the rivals and geniuses whom he once considered untouchable. He is called the Great King for a reason, after all. Earlier, I stated it was the intangibles that made Brady the greatest quarterback of all time. After talking to my friend, who has been a longtime Patriots fan, for his thoughts on what made Tom Brady great, he replied, "Unflinching self-confidence, the work ethic to match it, and the leadership qualities to inspire his team to believe they always had a chance. The desire to continuously prove himself year in and year out with a chip on his shoulder to those who didn't see him as good enough. No doubt, that also contributed to his fanatical devotion to his craft. All of these things, the elements unseen, the intangibles. Working hard is a very sustainable trait, a part of your character. If you don't have that, at some point the talent does wear off. You're drafted based on your talent or your potential, but the sustainable part about talent and potential is working hard. Guys who were ahead of me were always physically way more gifted than me. I had to make up a lot of ground physically in order to catch them. Though one fictional and one real, I can't help but see the parallels there. He transcended all of it, even if he wasn't as naturally gifted from a physical or mental standpoint. Even if he wasn't as lucky. Oikawa, as a player with unyielding perseverance, trying to discover if he truly had talent, and having the confidence to believe that the path he'd taken wasn't the wrong one, and being more than willing to find out. As a player who didn't achieve much in his high school career, and thus sought to play overseas and had the ability and perseverance to not only make it, but thrive. As a player who once saw himself as less than his rivals. As a player who was considered to be good, but not great. Polished his skills and added new ones to stand at the summit, the Olympics no less. As a player who always showed a great ability to connect on and off the court, in both his home and in a country overwhelmingly different from his own. Oikawa Tōru may not be a genius, but he most certainly was and is a monster, acknowledged by his fans, contemporaries, and rivals alike. And most importantly of all, he himself finally acknowledged it. We don't see the end of his professional career, but I am certain that at the end of his career, Oikawa was acknowledged as one who had talent, and made it bloom brilliantly. Would it be that you and I could say the same at the very, very end? That the elements of us not seen by others, the intangibles, might prove to be one of our greatest advantages. What we do and who we are today does not define what we will do and what we will be tomorrow, as the Olympic coach so eloquently states. But that doesn't only apply to sport. No. The place where monsters go isn't only limited to sport and athletics.